Thanks to you and the HCI team for helping build a community of HR professionals and giving us the opportunity to interact in formats like that. I'm a little anxious and nervous today as I haven't done this many times, and I certainly don't get to see the audience in this circumstance. So hopefully some of the information will be engaging, to use the term, helpful, beneficial in your day-to-day use and applications. And hopefully we'll all have some fun across today's hour session. I'm certainly going to try and make it somewhat entertaining. So I'm going to touch on the topic of where employee recognition stands today and looking into the future. The 21st century used to seem some mystical point into the future. However, we are well into the 21st century now. Time seems only to be accelerating. During the course of today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the transition from tactical approaches to strategic. How do we make recognition programs something that actually delivers some strategic business outcomes as opposed to the traditional tactical executions of what are we doing around recognition and how does it work? And at the end, towards the end, I'll give some details on what, from my learning and experience over some 15 years now, building these programs, some key steps to success. Hopefully that's some helpful takeaway for you that you can apply with work that you all might be doing. Internally, we do rewards and recognition, online rewards. This is our new concept, and we'll see what you think. You feel free to utilize this, and the addition of caffeine into the water cooler is a motivational program. It's still early days, and we're testing that with some Starbucks product. We'll see how that works. But a bit more seriously, this is a picture of myself, and Holly was kind enough to give some introduction on my background. Personally, I'm been the CEO for 15, 16 years, started the business associated with some inspiration from my wife and my business partners, whereby we had some technological expertise, some human behavior psychology background, and sought to apply that in the area of human capital. As you may notice, this is not a Texas accent, even though that's where I happen to reside. It's an Australian accent, and so not to confuse you, but that's the sound you're going to hear for the next hour or so. So I want to share a personal philosophy, somewhat of an icebreaker, but something I'm finding more helpful on a day-to-day basis, and I share this often with folks, and that is asking ourselves the question of, where do we all stand in time? Are we happy to be here? And I ask a simple question that says, who lives a better life? Is it the first emperor of China, Qin Shi, Queen Victoria, the Queen of England, John D. Rockefeller, arguably the wealthiest American in history, Jane Doe? And of course, the question is obviously Jane Doe or us. Why? When we consider just some of the most basics of our day-to-day life, whether that be the clothes, the comfort of our mattress, the pillows, the food we eat, the places we can visit, and that's putting aside anesthetics and medicine, we without a doubt live a far better life than even the kings and emperors of the past, and it's important to appreciate that on a day-to-day basis because sometimes we get a little caught up in the day-to-day. The other thing I want to do is demystify what's often an asked question to an Australian, and that is the most dangerous animals in the world. Is it the funnel web spider, the box jellyfish of Queensland, or the brown snake, or potentially the kangaroo? Up to very recent history, it's clearly the box jellyfish, a type of jellyfish, stingray bluebottle, that frequents the northeast coast of Australia throughout the summer, that if it does bite you, you can unfortunately die, not instantaneously, but if you're not given medical treatment, followed by the funnel web spider and the brown snake, also highly poisonous creatures, and I'm sure we've all seen those television shows. But if you search YouTube, and I encourage you not to do it during today's presentation, but afterwards, about the boxing kangaroo event, you will see what clearly is the most dangerous of Australian animals, and that is a kangaroo taking on a dog, followed by a boxing match with the dog's owner. Certainly something quite amusing. All right, past the icebreakers and into what today's topic's about. Quick agenda. The big E for engagement. What's it all about? A brief history of recognition. What is the history, and how did we get to this point of what our current recognition program formats are? Then let's look at the influence of a multi-generational, multicultural workplace. How do they play a role in recognition? What's the impact of technology on today's workforce as it pertains to rewards and recognition and the relationship between rewards and recognition and engagement? Then what are some of the successful recognition best practices that we see companies applying? Why are they successful? What's the approach for building a business case if you're looking to try and argue for investments around driving engagement through rewards and recognition? What are the key variables in a business case? And if I were to summarize, what are the most successful 7 steps to follow in developing a strategy? And I'll happily share those with you as part of today's call. So firstly, the big E that we're all chasing. We all know it to be the word du jour. Whether we look back in time and find that it's replaced, it likely will at some point in the future. It used to be productivity or commitment or efficiency. Engagement's now some type of all-encompassing catchphrase. Interestingly, as I grew up, as I propose that you all did too, engagement meant the commitment to a partner for lifelong. In fact, it was the period of time that I guess was the lead up to that. So how it has transitioned from that core term to the term of maybe this term, whereby we're all a bit of the rat on the running wheel. I'm not entirely sure, but however, engagement is the word. If you're not sure about all the applications of engagement or how to define it or how to realize it, well, certainly there's been a significant amount of literature that has been created to support it, to help educate us, and to help us benefit from the opportunities that this concept affords. I think about engagement in a much more simplistic term. Again, everybody has their own ideas, but I think it's manifested in this brand for a few reasons. This brand represents the transition of a service orientation. We've moved from the manufacturing base in the history of the United States, as one of the biggest producers of products, to much more of a service-orientated organization. Starbucks exemplifies that in the experience that we have as a customer when basically we now do not go for coffee, we go for Starbucks. The product itself, we all can ask ourselves, is an expensive product relative to what it really costs to make it, but we're quite happy to pay a premium for it. And we have a service experience that is consistent across the organization, no matter which part of the country we're in. We always know what it feels like to get that service, and it's a quality service from the baristas that serve us there. Why and how did that all happen? It wasn't by fluke and coincidence. It was a very specific strategic pursuit and agenda by the CEO, Howard Schultz, who said we built the Starbucks brand first with our people, not in our consumers. I think that speaks a lot to the topic of today, and that is recognizing that many of the companies that are successful in the U.S. today are service-orientated companies, and that recognizing, or that those companies and their leadership recognizing that the greatest contributions that can be made to the success of those businesses are that for which the people are responsible for. So if we focus on our people, we're likely to be more successful. So there's been a lot of research done now that this engagement is a term that's used and thrown around. Numbers of entities are helping to quantify for us what actually is the engagement level. Historically, we know we had annual surveys, and that those surveys annually turned into quarterly surveys, and from quarterly surveys, they're now pulse surveys. Maybe it's too much information or a question of what are we going to do with that information. It's not a topic for me to cover today. At least there is an information and data point for that's helping us in HR build credibility and arguing the case for why this is an important agenda item and an objective and a measurement vehicle by which we can argue the business case for it. Interestingly, with all that research, and we're getting some interesting data points on what potentially is the same thing, but according to Towers Watson, we've got 40% highly engaged. According to Modern Survey, we have 14% engaged. According to Gallup, we have 32.9% engaged. According to Quantum Work, we have 65.9% engaged. I'm not really sure how to interpret all that. That's beyond my pay grade. Luckily, we've got the quality consultants out there to help us explain these graphs and what they actually do and mean. The important point is, however, that it's important that organizations are now committing real resources to solving or pursuing a strategy of improving engagement. Surveys, according to Burson, some $1.53 billion are projected to be spent around this topic of driving engagement, and that is all good, certainly good for HR professionals that believe the employees are one of the key variables in driving success, and the objective then for HR is to how do we get the most productivity out of those employees. So different people have pursued different approaches in terms of how to drive engagement. And depending upon who you are, you might have different strategic approach. I like the Picard approach, which is you press a button and in a very deep voice you say, let's engage. Alternatively, you've got the Richard Branson approach, which I also like, is screw it, let's just do it, which I also think often in business is really the right approach to start with, which is we've just got to do this. Let's not overanalyze it. If we know we need to do it, let's go ahead and do it. Richard Branson, of course, we all know his successes, and maybe the screw it, let's do it's a bit simplistic. I certainly really like this statement, which is train our people well enough so they can leave, to make them experts, but treat them well enough so that they stay. What a great objective to be able to at least reach towards, because in somewhat that's the balance that we've got when we're driving engagement and we're driving our employee populations. Equip them with the expertise so that they can be successful, but treat them well enough so that they want to stay with us. So beyond the great strategies of some successful CEOs, what's a more practical or what's a more definitive, systematic approach? So our view says, look at all of the reward and recognition programs that you currently have in place, because having done this for 15 years, we see from client to client, organization to organization, that it's not that money is not being spent or resources applied in these areas of reward and recognition with a view to driving an engagement. It's all a question of how are those resources being applied and how do they interact with each other, and how are they interacting with each other with a common view to reinforcing the culture, focusing on business objectives, the values of the organization, the mission of the organization, and working in a collaborative fashion such that to an employee's perspective, the view of these programs, the view of these initiatives are a cohesive view with a common message, with a common set of objectives. For ultimately, we still all know that as per the study by Peter Drucker, that culture is the king in terms of helping organizations drive specific business outcomes. So I mentioned that I had several simplistic steps, recommendations to follow when developing a rewards and recognition strategy that is designed to drive engagement scores, help a company become best places to work. Strong leadership support at a financial, tactical, and cultural level. Make sure we've got a comprehensive program design with a view and a focus on alignment of the programs. Simplify the programs and integrate them into your organization's operations so they're easy to be used and they're easily accessible by employees. Make sure you have a committed communication strategy for the program itself is only as good as that for which people are aware that it's there and that it is good. communications ongoing is an absolute requirement. Dedicate some internal program management resources to it. They don't have to be FTEs, but make sure that there are some people who have ownership of the success of the programs. Try and deploy the program in as many forms. I use the term modalities as possible so that it is generationally attractive and appealing and technologically sophisticated for those that are technologically sophisticated, but simple and accessible enough for those that aren't. And finally, either make sure you've got some good quality internal resources to help execute it, perhaps those that may have been involved in it before, or if not, look to find a vendor or a solution partner that can help you execute. I'll come back to those points in a bit further detail again, so if you were looking to capture all those now, I'll have that for you later. So let's look a little bit about the history of recognition. How did we get here? And I think it's an interesting little journey to give us some perspective. So obviously in early days, recognition really wasn't there. It's probably a byproduct of the end of the Industrial Revolution and into the post-World War II U.S. And in that period of time, we had a great golden age, as the current administration or recent politics has been referring to. And in that golden age, we had careers that tended to last longer. There was a greater commitment between the employer and the employee, and symbolic recognition at milestone events at 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 years, and whether the format was a watch as a symbolic communication that says, this is meaningful and thank you for the time, or a crystal ornament because that was a precious item. Those, of course, were all appropriate at that time and period. There is a question that I often ask HR professionals when I'm meeting. Does anybody know the 5 years? What's the 5, 10, 15? Why are these milestones? And most people will say, well, because they're milestones. It's 5, 10, 15 years, and that's why we've got our program like that. But actually, there's a bit of a different history, and I thought it'd be interesting to share that actually it's the IRS who's helped define that for us, and thankfully the IRS helps us with HR programs because that's one of their objectives, and I'm making a bit of a joke about it, but the real reason why there are these milestone programs and they're at 5-year increments is because the IRS defines giving a tangible gift at 5-year increments during somebody's career is an acceptable tax-free award. And I think that's a positive thing. I think it's interesting for HR folks to know that that's actually the history of why the milestones, because we all wonder, what's the 5, 10, 15 years, especially in the current turnover rates and the trends of millennials and so forth. But I think the impact also is that, well, given that's there, it's probably one of the few, if only, remaining, let's say, opportunities to give a tax-free award to an employee. Well, we should probably try and find ways to maximize that, should the opportunity arise, and that there is sufficient budget to do that, because there's very few other ways of which a tax-free gift can be provided to an employee. What's perhaps more important than that, though, is that form and is the format of many of these, years of service milestone programs appropriate for the current, generations and more modern workplaces? How do they perceive it? Is it credible? Do they like the plaques or the award presentations? Does that feel and smack of authenticity to them, or does it come off the wrong way? Because the spirit and intent of the programs, of course, is to recognize and celebrate people for their accomplishments. So the most important thing, we all are looking for in HR is to make sure that the employee perception of the program is consistent with the spirit by which it was intended, and that is to actually celebrate and thank you and show appreciation for it. And not as often is the case that the program kind of got distorted and bent out of shape over time, and the budgets were torn from it, and such it ends up being something that really is creating the complete inverse of what we intend, and that is an effect whereby some employees might be saying, well, is that all I'm worth? Well, that certainly wasn't the spirit and intent of it. So what beyond those years of service programs have we got in place in most organizations today? Got a strategy of engagement, so sometimes there are safety incentives, Sometimes there are departmental incentives. Sometimes there are award catalogs or walking programs or biannual awards, maybe an award dinner. Then they've got a wellness program, manager spot awards. Perhaps there's service awards layer onto it, sales incentives, employee of the month, holiday parties, and that's a lot of programs, right? And we kind of understand why it's like that, because if you go back in time in history and look at an organization, these programs were added over time, and they were put together underneath a committee with some leadership, with some budget, with the best intentions, with the technology that was available at the time, and with the trends of what one thought was popular. But if you were to look back at them all now and say, well, let's have a look at all these programs that we've got here, and we understand they're all run by different parts of the organization. They've all been created over time, and there's different committees that have been sort of involved, and they're administered over. If we were to rebuild them all, use the same budgets, and the same spirit and with the same intent, would they really look like they currently do, or would they look markedly different? And if we say they're going to look markedly different, well, then I sort of throw the challenge out to say, well, there's no reason why they still need to look the same, because everything else in the organization's changed. These need to change and evolve and grow too, especially because the spirit by which they were originally created was to help drive greater employee satisfaction in the organization, and from that, whether that was the term used at the time or not, better engagement. All right, so there's the history of where we're at today. Many organizations often running various types of programs, not necessarily consolidated and coordinated opportunities to do so. What's the workforce looking like? All right, let's take a step back of who are our customers, and our employees are our customers. So we've all know the term of the millennials. This is their period, and now we'll have a new generation coming through shortly. But as you can see from the Pew Center research study, basically the boomers are now decreasing as their percentage of the population workforce. Gen Xers are no longer the majority. Millennials will be the majority. And just recognizing that, okay, the workforce is different. Now, the workforce themselves are aware that things have changed and are changing and continue to change, and that's having an effect on them and their perceptions of their work and their career. One of the interesting perceptions is this question that we heard a lot about in the last 3, 4, 5 years, and that is the ability for Social Security to continue to support and fund the retirement programs that we know the baby boomers are eligible for, and there's questions about the Gen Xers, let alone the millennials. So the data tells us that by 2034, Social Security, at least as currently projected, will need to reach into some of its fund assets to meet the shortfalls and the commitments. No one's predicting that this is dire, only that the level of benefits will not be the same, mainly because there is a smaller employee base at the younger generations that will be supporting a larger retired employee population above. And I think it has some effect on employee perceptions, and certainly on a question relating to transfer of knowledge and information from generation to generation. And one of the objectives we all have is we want the baby boomers who've accumulated significant knowledge to be motivated to transition information, knowledge, and expertise to the younger generations, and for those generations to have a motivation, desire, and interest to try and encourage the baby boomers before they retire and leave to transfer knowledge and information across to them. Again, an objective of engagement. Folks talk a lot about millennials. I think this Nielsen study is interesting. Again, millennials are just referring to a generation of time, and people born in a certain period have certain, sort of views, perspectives, slightly different. I think some of these things are helpful as it pertains to strategizing around employee engagement strategies and recognizing what your population is like. So from this Nielsen study, they're the social media generation, so we know that. They are moving back to the cities. Their parents had moved them out to the suburbs. Well, now they want to move back to the cities. Fair enough. They value authenticity and creativity. I've highlighted that. I think that's an important point to remember. They like to buy local goods. They care about their families and friends. I think all generations do that. They're coming of age amongst a dire economic climate. Perhaps that was relevant then. We're not sure what the climate is. It seems to be positive at the moment. But they're social. They like authenticity. Right? I think they're the two big points, and we can all relate to that. What else is changing in the workforce is the cultural mix. Population's not the same. So 2014, we had a 54% white population with Hispanic, Black, Asian following thereafter. Projections by 2015 shows significant decrease in the white portion of the employing population, growing numbers of Hispanic and other minority groups. Summary is, that's great. We're going to have a mixed population. Many of us already know that. We can see that in our employee populations. Question is, how does that influence questions around engagement, questions around recognition? First, let's be aware of it. So I think, one of the obvious things is cultural sensitivity. Let's say this is your employee population. You wanted to do something positive for them around recognition. This probably wouldn't be the right kind of thing to do. So we've got to be sensitive and aware of who's our population, what's their cultural mixes, what things are going to be interesting and appropriate for them. Not just specific things, okay, that was a sort of reward for a gift and inappropriate, probably not really well thought through. Let's look at some other sort of subtleties. Well, we've all grown up in with a calendar, a U.S. calendar that tells us what are the main events throughout the year, some of which are related to living in America. Some of them are still sort of remnants of the background and history and culture and religion of the majority of the population. Well, there are many calendars, right? And there are calendars for religious events throughout the year. There are multiple New Year's days, depending upon which culture you're at. Obviously, from an HR standpoint, we can't really change. It's not viable. It's not appropriate to be sort of changing holidays. But being aware and making that positive, that says, hey, I know it's Chinese New Year coming up, and maybe there's some message communication to that. What's that going to do if you happen to be part of that population? It's going to say, I work for a company that's aware of my background. That's great. And people might talk about it a little bit. And what's that going to do to the people that happen to come from that culture? Well, they're going to go, wow, they like me, they're aware, they're sensitive to things that are happening in my world. So as it pertains to recognition programs and engagement strategies, cultural awareness is going to become more important. As important, maybe even more important, is the impact of technology. What's happened technologically in the last 5-7 years, and how does this play out? So we obviously have seen the period of social media, probably in the last 5 to 7 years, has had a significant impact. We have had technology platforms overall, that is anything from our smartphone devices to our HRIS systems internally, to the tools we work with to learn, to ways in which we share information and interact with each other. We have the advent of artificial intelligence that we're on the cusp of at this period, how that's going to affect employees. It's certainly already starting to play a role in talent acquisition strategies, in looking to try and find and match employee candidates with organizations. So technology has not only affected us and our day-to-day in manners that are so pervasive that if we lost access to our internet, our world as we currently know it would, quite literally have some real difficulties. But we also, as humans and employees in this case, have begun to look at technology in a very different way. We use it to shop, we use it to pay, we use it to interact with our friends, we use it to complete our business on a day-to-day basis. If we don't walk out of the house with our smartphone connected to us, we feel a little naked. We all know that experience and that sensation of having the phone off for a couple of days, and how it's somewhat profound. it gives us that awareness of just how connected we've become to it. So technology will play a big role in ongoing in terms of how programs are built inside companies, recognition programs, engagement programs overall. For some facts, as of 2016, from Comscore data research, adults in the U.S. are spending up to 2 full workdays per month on social media. So there's an indicator of the level of commitment that we're giving to that screen and the type of interactions we have, because it's not just that we're on the screen, it's what are we doing? Well, we're connecting with friends, and we're sharing information about our family, and we're reading about other people's families. So we're using it as a vehicle to develop strong relationships. I can argue about whether it's as strong as real life. It's not the purpose of my message. It's that this is part of our world, and it will continue to be a growing part of our world. It hasn't reached its threshold yet. We will continue to be interacting with these types of technologies to support the development of personal relationships. The question of what age groups, well, again, it's not just Generation X and millennials. It's all generations, and again, granted, older generations might have greater difficulties or a reticence to engage with those tools. Nonetheless, from the 50 to 64-year-old age group, already 50 to 64% use social media on an ongoing basis. So the influence of social media on us is that it is creating the relationships, different types of relationships, but in the workplace, if one were to ask what are the influences of retention and what are the influences of engagement levels and satisfaction, a lot of that would be around social connections made in the organization. Employee engagement, as per the Forbes article, is largely about social connections happening in organizations, aligning work experiences with employees' cultural needs. So social media type experiences are a key enabler to develop and facilitate employee peer-to-peer relationships and potentially employee-to-manager relationships. So one needs to be cognizant of how to utilize technology, how to utilize social media type capabilities in workplaces in order to continue to speak to our customers, these people who work for the organizations. Additionally, we've got the question around smartphone accessibilities. Technology is not all defined by social media. What else is happening technologically? According to this, looks like just about everybody's got a smartphone device. I don't think that's unreasonable for us to say if we look around. Once you're about 14, 15, 16 years old, that's what you get. You go into the telephone store, they're giving you a smartphone. What's the implications of that? We're carrying a computer around. What's happening in the workplace environment relating to that? Well, subject to some IT discussions around bring your own devices. Many companies now have got policies that say you can bring your own device. And then the question of what functions, what business functions are people allowed to do and use their personal device on? Well, that's subject to each company what they're doing. But what's for certain happening, scheduling, certainly communications, calendars, emailing, some benefits programs. So that line is blurring, and business-related functions are already moving towards people using their personal devices to do that. So everybody's got smartphones now, most of them, and businesses are looking to leverage the fact that the smartphone is on the employee 7 days a week. What are we going to do with that smartphone? When you think about the earlier comments around the social media interactions, well, certainly this is going to be a vehicle by which employees are going to be interacting with each other, both personally and company related. So overall, we've got the Internet of Everything happening, the Internet of Things, IoT, that's the acronym. but speaking mainly around, we all know the internet and technology is going to play a big role on our development for engagement strategies. We've got changing demographics that we want to be sensitive to, and we've got cultural changes in terms of what's the mix of our employee populations. So based on that learning, or based on an awareness of that's what's happening, what are some of the best practices we've seen? So first I'll revert back to the early days of that psych course that we all did, and Maslow, and I don't know if Maslow's been coming up in your worlds, but I like this particular chart. I think it's very apropos in our time in history in America, is if we look at Maslow's levels from self-actualization at the pinnacle to survival at the bottom, I think we're all fairly comfortable that, well, there's no survival issues going on a day-to-day basis. Very few that are in the United States. We've got security issues. Okay, we're always aware of security, but that's not really plaguing people's psychology on a day-to-day basis, or most of us. But the next level up is that sort of belonging, and I want to feel part of it all. Well, I think the fact that society so quickly gravitated to this sort of social media interactions is a testimony and reinforcement that Maslow's ideas were pretty solid, and that the reason why we're spending so much time on that social media is the sense of it makes us feel like we're belonging to a community, and we're able to interact with our family and our friends and create little communities, and they're communicating and sharing with us, so a sense of belonging. But I like the linkage in this diagram where we're mapping engagement levels against Maslow's view and commenting on sort of recognition for doing those things, showing a parallel between those that are recognized, where that recognition, of course, is credible and authentic, are highly engaged and aspiring towards self-actualization. And how does that manifest in an employee's view of how they're interacting in the workplace? As well, they want to do their best and they want to inspire others to do their best, and they really like working there. And that's what we're all striving to inspire in our employees. So when you think about best practices, consider that as a vision and an inspirational point to work towards and share, with colleagues and the team as you develop your recognition strategies. How are our recognition programs aligning with this, and are they credible and authentic? 2 is, let's think about what's preventing us at an organization from being successful with our recognition strategies and our approaches. Because if we can identify what the roadblocks are, then if we can battle the roadblocks, then we have nothing in front of us to be successful. So first roadblock we come across in working with clients is the organizational culture that's already in place the problem. That we don't have leadership support for this, that they're obstinate, that they still believe that people should be happy that they've just got a job there, and that's the extent of the recognition. And if so, what can we do to address that roadblock? Do we have a problem with budget? We don't ever get any budget or resources to do anything interesting. All the budget seems to be consumed by other departments. Okay, if so, well, how are we going to make a business case that the application of budget in this area would yield a better return than the application of that same budget in other areas? Build a business case. Do we think we can get employee adoption and participation rate up higher because we have remote workers, or because the nature of our employee population is that they don't have computers or smartphones or access? And how are we communicating, with our population? Do we think we'll get the messages out around reward and recognition? Whether those be the exact roadblocks, the best practice I'm sharing is to say, having determined that there's a vision towards a greater recognition program vision, then identify, well, what are the roadblocks to stop us from getting there, and see if you can address the roadblocks. For removing the roadblocks will then provide the path forward. When you think about what are the attributes of the best recognition programs we've seen, again, fairly simplistically and across all organizations, many different types of industries, the first is make sure that your program aligns with the business objectives. That in research done, those companies who have, and this is by Sherm, tighter alignment between the objectives of the business and the inspirations in the recognition program have up to an 80% success rate, as at least it pertains to achieving business goals, as compared to recognition that is not about achieving business goals, but just recognition for the sake of it. 2, when you look at the tactical execution of your recognition program, ask, is it authentic to the populations that we're talking about? Who thinks this is authentic? Some of our clients put committees together with some representations from various generations to ask them questions relating to authenticity. Authenticity is key for success. Is it timely? Meaning, does the activity for which somebody's being recognized have a short period of time between that the completion of the activity and the recognition for it, with the objective being you want to narrow the time lag down, those programs and processes whereby there's an email sent because I saw somebody doing something great that I want to recognize them for, that then takes 3 to 4 or 5 weeks before it goes some internal approval process system, and eventually the person sort of comes up and goes, oh, you were recognized for this thing. And first, what was it you were talking about? Oh, that thing you did 5 weeks ago. You've lost half the power of it. Those processes sometimes get in the way. So as timely as possible. And then tasteful and meaningful, which is to say if you were that employee and that is how that recognition was delivered to you, would you find that tasteful and meaningful? Again, considering generational and cultural attributes attached to it. But if you keep those in mind as you design your programs, we can pretty well say to you, you're on your way to getting a good, authentic recognition program that will influence your engagement scores. All right, so when you're building the business case, the big questions, how do I build a business case for this? Many companies, I find, either already have a fair amount of money being invested in various rewards and recognition programs, but they're not aligned. So the question says, well, how do we work out how to get them all aligned, and what does that take to do it? Other categories are that we don't actually have any budget because management doesn't believe in investment in this particular area, or in fairness to that management, they've been using the budget for other applications. Well, how do we get our budget requests up to the to the top of the list? And I think there's a few sort of key points to share. Firstly, it doesn't require a lot of technology, so to do this doesn't require a significant investment in training. Programs are often success-based, which means they're linked to utilization of the program, and so relative to other investments that HR might suggest or make, this is going to be a lower threshold with a higher, quicker impact. So, keeping that in mind, it's relatively easier to make the business case for these than other investments, which we know can be done. First step. We think, do a program audit. What's a program audit? What's already in place? What's the results and what impact are we having based on what we've already got in place? What's the credibility or authenticity of what we already have in place for employees? How much money are we spending in terms of administration and overhead for all these programs? There's the program audit. It'll give a sense of what are we doing already. And maybe we're not actually asking for any more budget, but we are going to have a challenge of looking to maybe reallocate some of that budget. When you're building a program, what are the budget elements? What are your fixed costs, which is a program build, some technology to put in place to support the program, some ongoing program support, which is, who's answering questions about the program to employees, who's marketing and keeping the program alive and keeping people engaged. What staffing do we need? Have we got some available FTE resources that we can use to help support the program? And then the other cost, generally the larger cost, is if we're going to have some monetary components, what's the reward spend? What we like to say is you put all this together and you make the business case saying, well, if we want to make this company a great place to work, or if we, want to reduce turnover, or we want to impact KPIs, this is a relatively cost-effective, quicker way to deliver some business outcomes and results. And more often than not, it doesn't actually require an increase in any budget spend, only a reallocation. What are some of the key performance indicators per Gallup's study? Employers in the top quartile of engagement scores will experience reductions in absenteeism and turnover, reductions in shrinking, safety incidents if you're in healthcare, patient safety. Conversely, we're having positive customer experiences, improved productivity, improved profitability. In summary, a 21% increase in productivity and a 22% increase in profitability for companies that have got high engagement scores or are in the top quartile list according to Gallup. $11 billion lost every year. What's the turnover at your organization? Some companies like to have a positive and turnover rate. Nothing wrong with that. The question is, at what point is the turnover becoming destructive? If you're in an organization, according to Career Builder stats, where you've got 1 in 5 employees planning to leave, that's not a good use of money. There's a real problem going on there. And the question of how do you assess the cost of turnover? What's the replacement cost of the hire in terms of the process and procedure? How much money have we lost in the investment on that employee who's now new employee needs to be retrained, etc.? And then a question of, well, what kind of impact are we going to have if we had an improved engagement score in terms of that turnover rate? For companies that we've done modeling with, the returns are pretty easy to justify, mainly because the cost of doing good rewards recognition programs are not expensive and the cost of turnover are high, again, if you're in an industry or a category where you've got a high turnover rate. If you're still unsure, well, even the federal government is now putting in a variable comp bonus plan attached to the executive leadership, whereby it's a function of the employee engagement scores. This is per the Washington Post of 2015. When you look into the future, years ahead, PricewaterhouseCoopers survey saying, okay, top talent, what's important to them? Well, firstly, one, top talent wants to know, well, what's this company about? What are they trying to do, and how does that relate to me? And relatively speaking, pay is pay. I'll of course want to get good, fair pay, but it's not the most important, So here we're seeing it in the data and the projections from a PwC study. So again, business case, saying, well, we think we can, take a little bit off the comp plan side, apply it to having a better culture, much less expensive investment, really. And if we get to this point, we've got the means by which we can, really attract top talent and then, of course, retain top talent. All right, so having been doing this for 15 years, I said early on in the beginning I'd give you a brief summary of, what are some of the key learnings. All right, so lesson 1, key point 1, find the leadership support. Right? When you've got leadership support, and it goes beyond just the recognition programs or engagement strategies. You've always got, the muscle and the weight behind you. But specific examples, insurance company client, the CEO himself launches the program with the video. The CEO is a user of the program, and it's a large employer, some 5,000. They have a 98% utilization rate. Another case study situation with a retailer, several 100,000 employees, executive leadership support, pushing for the program, very little in terms of monetary awards, some 200,000 recognition activities per year. Conversely, we see client programs that have a good and healthy budget without leadership support. While they may not be detractors, they're not supporting the program specifically, relatively more expensive to get similar results and outcomes. So if you haven't got leadership support, you've got to put more money in the program, is the summary. 2, let's make sure this program design is aligned and build alignment inside the company. I've sat in meetings and run presentations where we'll have representatives from HR, from benefits, from comp, from EHS, from ops, and they'll all articulate their programs, and in more cases than not, they're looking at each other going, I didn't know you did that. I didn't know we had one of those programs. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Well, there it was, alignment. So there's number 2. Make sure the program's all aligned. 3, to reduce the number of programs. Too many different programs creates confusion, duplicated administration. We're wasting resources and not combining them, and eventually we end up with the potential that employees are like, I don't know what that is. Is there a handbook just for the programs that we've put together? Reduce the programs, align them with the business objectives and value and mission for the business, and you will begin to tangibilize and influence the culture. How are you going to communicate this program ongoing? How do you keep them alive? Why is social media exciting, and why are we logging in on a frequent basis? Because it's dynamic and it's evolving and it's growing. So what's the communication strategy? Employees want to know what's happening in the company, naturally. They want to know what's happening with their peers. They're interested in who's got anniversaries or birthdays or who's been recognized or what are we trying to do. Some of that naturally comes through the program as a result of entries by employees into the program, but some of it needs to be seeded consciously and intentionally by the company to drive its alignment with. Dedicated program management. So what does that mean? You should have some internal resources assigned to the program. Not full-time, maybe 10, 20% of an FTE to administer it. So you'll want an internal administrator, and you'll certainly want a program champion who is responsible for seeing the program succeed, grow, and develop. In terms of program modalities, what I'm meaning by that is you've got populations from 18, 19-year-olds all the way to 64, 65-year-olds. The programs don't have to be one shape or form where something's sent in a mail. You can have a mail component to it. You can have a smartphone component to it, an internet component to it. Make sure that your program is appealing dimensionally. And while that may have in days gone by seemed like a momentous task, that's not an unreasonable task to achieve in this day and time. Find a committed vendor or partner, or if you've got internal resources that are experienced and can do this kind of thing and pull the team together, well, that's just as good as well. But there are people that do this, both as employees of your organization who've been involved and done this. Certainly there are professional organizations that can pull this together. Having somebody with the experience and depth and knowledge and having done that will have a significant impact and influence because they know what it takes to do this and they know where the program goes over time, help advise along the way. So there was your summary of your 7 steps to success. Again, these materials will be available to you for download from HCI. Remember to try and align your programs. That's the key message. If you're successful, these are the kinds of things you can achieve. I think this summarizes it. So one case study client who'd had a high utilization rate of the program in surveying employees. What was the second best benefit after a flexible work schedule? Was the Employee Rewards and Recognition Program. Second best benefit. And of those, 80% of those who selected the recognition program were top performers. So top talent like recognition. So some fun at the end. I've appreciated you all taking some time and listening to me. I hope it was entertaining. I hope it was meaningful. I thank again the folks at HCI for giving us a chance to do it. I wanted to finish up a little earlier and give some time for questions. I think there's 3 minutes left, which isn't really much, but what I will certainly happily do is compile the questions and do my best to send out and distribute responses through HCI. Of course, I'd be available offline if you'd ever like to reach out, even if it's just for an informal chat about what you're doing with recognition. So with that, I'll close it from my side. Holly, I'm not sure if there's any formality you wanted to do, but I think we're probably at the end, and I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing your expertise and taking our listeners on the tour covering the history of employee recognition from its early days to its current dynamic formats. So 3 minutes is better than none, and we certainly have time for one question. So we'll get to the very first one that came in. This comes from Jeffrey, and he wants to know if there is a recognition program that is sustainable.
So, we'll speak from our world that we have clients that have programs that have been running for over a decade now. Granted, the programs have grown and evolved, So what its path has been was they started with a very simplistic years of service milestones, and then from there added a peer recognition component, and then a manager spot award component, and then a safety component, and then an employee referral component, and an idea submission component. Again, with the view that the sustainability is a function of are they credible and meaningful and well used. And because of the social aspects of what current recognition programs are like, they are self-fulfilling much in the same way that social media itself and Facebook has continued on, because they're continuing to provide some relevancy and they're communicating to their employees, and assuming that the employees find it relevant, then what you might be recognized for might change and evolve over time. But the fact that people like that their self-esteem is an important driver and motivator, there is nothing that says a recognition program only lasts for a certain amount of time. It needs to be coached and it needs to evolve and grow with the organization. But there's no time frame we've seen from our clients that says, look, this just has a certain amount of time and has a shelf life.
All right, cool. Great answer, Michael. And thanks for squeezing that one question in that follows, such a full hour of information that comes from you. And I love sharing gratitude that comes from our members. And I'll just pass these on to you. Caroline says, excellent. Michelle says that she wants to thank you and says that was very comprehensive and informative. And then also Jennifer wants to say thank you, and she's found your presentation very informative and interesting, and we definitely hope everyone else did too. So that will wrap up our material for today. But guys, please continue this discussion on Twitter using that hashtag HCIChat. And I'll say one more thank you to our presenter today, Michael, and also to everyone at Online Rewards for making this webcast possible. And to all of our HCI members, as always, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to spend with us. Remember to take a look at the upcoming HCI events by clicking the Attend a Conference link at the top of this page. And we look forward to seeing all of you participate in another HCI learning opportunity soon. Have a great day, everyone.